I want to take a moment to revise what we covered yesterday. Just going by the board, it ended up a little bit messy. I don't want us to lose the key points of what was being said. I also, again, repeat myself, I recommend everyone draw the lines for yourself, the way that you best understand them. The way I draw them may not be the best way for you to remember them. You'll have your own way of how to highlight points and construct that reform line. And it sticks so much better in your mind, and whenever you hear any presentation you can take it back to the reform line and see how it fits. These are our structures. So we took the reform line of the 144,000. We saw 1989 to 9/11. There's 4 periods of time. 1989 to 9/11 is the first. This is the ploughing. 9/11 to Sunday law. Is the early rain. Sunday law to Daniel 12:1 is the latter rain. Daniel 12:1 to second Advent is harvest. It's the 4 periods of time in the model of agriculture. Ploughing, early rain, latter rain, harvest. And then we saw that within this model, within these 4 periods of time, each period has a message. So 1989 to 9/11, there's an increase of knowledge on a particular message. And this, particularly this one, we can see encapsulates everything that comes back, that comes later. So from the very beginning, 1989 to 91, this increase of knowledge, and then 1996, it's formalized. In the Time of the End magazine, there's a connection to time. Over here, Sunday law to Daniel 12:1, there's an increase of knowledge, and then it's formalized at the loud cry. And we went to Millerite history, and what is Sunday law in Millerite history? What camp meeting? July 21, Boston. What's the loud cry? Exeter. And between them there's another camp meeting where the cry resounded. Concord. So even when we come, based on Millerite history, we can see there's a waymark on the line of the 144,000 between Sunday law and the loud cry. And then we begin to see that this pattern is the same. That 1989 to 9/11 has the same structural pattern as Sunday law to close of probation. And you can see that in Millerite history, 1798, 1818, 1833, 1840. They have the same pattern, and when you come down here and they have that message of Samuel Snow, it's July 21 at Boston, then August 1 at Concord, August 15 at Exeter, and then October 22. It's a repeating pattern. So I know that 1996 isn't the midnight cry or the loud cry, but it still carries with it certain characteristics. The loud cry is a formalization of a message. 1996 is a formalization of a message. So to understand it, I want to continue to label them: Boston, Concord, and Exeter. And then we saw the waymarks that exist between close of probation and second Advent. There's the death decree. And then there's the message of time. The day and the hour is given for the second Advent. So even within this history, you have an increase of knowledge and a formalization. 2 waymarks.
Is that the universal death decree?
Yes, I believe so. So based on this repeating pattern, there must be also two waymarks between 9/11 and Sunday Law. This can't be empty space. I would suggest they're Raphia and Panium. But then if we come down to the reform line of the priests, we repeated this, 1989 to 9/11 is the same. We're the only group that has the experience of the 144,000. That should tell us something. We had this increase of knowledge and formalization. And then we come down here and we would mark 2014 as the Sunday Law. And therefore, if it's Sunday Law, there must be this is Boston, there must be a Concord and an Exeter before our close of probation. And our second Advent. Panium. So if we take this structure from this, then we must also take this down to the history between 2014 and 2019. And we saw within here there are two important waymarks, 2016 and 2018. 2018 is the Midnight Cry or Exeter. 2014 was Boston. So we have Boston, Concord, Exeter. October 22.
Is that supposed to be 1951?
Here?
No. To the right? The clan.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Got my nines and my ones. Thank you. And this history is repeated here. And we're already saying without this logic there's a waymark between 2019 and Panium. That is 2020. And one of the histories you can take to that waymark is the American Revolution, the Battle of Concord and Lexington. We saw in 2016 that you can mark Concord from both streams of information, from disinformation, from both the King of the North and the King of the South. That they're both, not only they're in Concord at the very first battle that we see on our reform line, other than 1989, the first battle involving Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, they're in Concord. And then you can also see that both of the mechanisms they use have a connection to Concord, whether it's the Concordia Summit with Donald Trump or Concord Management and Consulting for Vladimir Putin. But we took this as a repeating history. We've had an increase of knowledge on a particular subject. And we also placed that between 9/11 and 2014 there had to be a message, a testing message. And I suggested, without going into the external events of this history, which we will do, that is internally the message of the 2520. 9/11, it's unsealed. 2009, there's a series of presentations done called the 2520 Revealed. That's the most comprehensive explanation of the 2520 yet done in the movement. And I believe Elder Jeff refers to that even today quite regularly as the premier source for understanding the 2520. That was Elder Parminder. He lays out the 2520 in 2009, but it hasn't reached its full swelling until the 2520 has been broken down into the 126 and the 151 that is time setting. The 2520 itself is part of that message, but what it gives us is time. And it gives us that message of time in 2012. So the formalization of the message, 1996, is the Time of the End magazine. 2012 is time setting. 2018, November 9, is time. It's a characteristic. If we take this waymark down to this waymark, it's time. It's the characteristic of Exeter. But time setting itself is not a test for this dispensation. The test for this dispensation is different. The fact that we were able to accept time setting so easily here is because it was no longer our test. It had already been introduced, we'd already failed it, we were given an opportunity to resit it. I want to suggest that this test, leading up to a close of probation, I don't believe it's one that we can reset. I think it's different. This one we had time to reset. We had time to settle into it. This one we're coming up to a shut door. And by the very nature of the message, I don't think we will reset it if we fail it. But the message for this dispensation is not time setting. The test is not November 9. So every single dispensation, ploughing, early rain, latter rain, harvest, has this characteristic of a swelling. And when that message is given, we're tested upon it. 9/11 is where really we're tested from the minute that message arrives. The minute someone hands me a Time of the End magazine, I'm tested upon it. The minute I hear in 2012 that there's studies coming out of Great Britain relating to time setting, I'm tested upon it. 2018, October, immediately we begin to be tested upon it. But it has continued to grow. We hand in our papers November 9. We don't sit a separate test or distinct separate test from the message that has already been given. So what I wanted us to settle into, first of all, that everything ties back to here. The Time of the End magazine, what were the two rivers? The Ulai and the Hiddekel, and what are they? One takes you to the river of life, to the sea of glass, sorry. One river takes you to the sea of glass, and one river takes you to the lake of fire. You have two streams laid out here. Time of the End magazine doesn't just give you time. It isn't just time that's come through that magazine, whether or not it's been recognised to its fullest extent. It also gives us two streams of information. The Ulai and the Hiddekel, they're laid out on page 8 of the Time of the End magazine. And now when we get to this dispensation, we're supposed to identify what those two streams of information are, internally and particularly externally. I want to skip the line of the Levites and go to the line of the Nethinims. It begins from 2014. The Levites from 9/11, we move one dispensation across because one is harvested straight after the other. So 2014 is the Time of the End for Nethinim. Is that when they're meant to become aware of external events and be agitated? When was the Adventist Church supposed to be agitated and realise we're coming up against a new time period? 10 years before. 1979, there was a 10-year period to wake up. What did we place in these 10 years? This is the Afghan War. What else? So we have a revolution in Iran in 1979. A new dictator takes power. How long does he reign for? 10 years. 1979 is the Iranian Revolution. He takes over. His fundamental Islamic, he's like even today is revered as their father. He dies in 1989. It's a 10-year history. If we want to talk about church and state, 10-year history, what do we place in here? The moral majority and Jerry Falwell. The very first work they do is to cause the election of what president? Ronald Reagan and then George Bush. First Reagan and then George Bush. Both those presidents are greatly helped into power through the work of the moral majority. Jerry Falwell forms this organisation in 1979, dissolves it in 1989. And why did he form this organisation? What are they fighting against? What's happening externally that makes them form this organisation?
The removal of religion in the United States from all kinds of different things like schools.
The removal of religion from schools, Roe versus Wade, that's what they like to talk about. If you actually went into that history and saw what was happening that really mobilised them, what upset them and caused them to come back in and try and take over the government was the fact they had Christian schools and the government was forcing them to desegregate. It's actually the fundamental underlying racism that runs through the Christian right. They can't talk about that now, but that's what mobilised them in 1979. It's feminism and desegregation. I just want us to see from the very beginning, 1979, the issues are racism and sexism. The desegregation of their schools, where they were threatened with no longer being tax exempt unless they desegregated, caused them to come together and to decide it was time to take back control of the government. And they began to do that with the moral majority. Their first success was Ronald Reagan. Their second was George Bush. And by the time they had those two in, our subsequent history is inevitable. The work is done. Those two led about to Donald Trump and Sunday law. It sparks everything. But I want us to see from the very beginning what the issues were. We're going to go through that in more detail. So the Nethinims, from 2014, this isn't when they're meant to be agitated. They're meant to be agitated 10 years before in 2004. And we're going to go into that history and what they were meant to see. This is an important waymark on our reform line. 2014 to 2019. Is there increase of knowledge and a formalisation? 2016 and 2018. Every waymark that impacts from 2014 impacts every group of people, priest, Levite and Nethinim. I think we miss so much and we're at a danger of misunderstanding if we don't also see how it impacts them. So if we see 2016 just as a message in Daniel 11 and we don't also see the issues in the United States externally, we start to make mistakes. So when you come to their reform line, they have an increase of knowledge and a formalisation. They're meant to understand the difference between truth and error based on what? Based on whether or not they want the Ulai or the Hiddekel. You're right to say conspiracy theories, but they have two to choose from, truth and error. And when do you see those two streams formalised? You can see it back here. I particularly want to highlight 1996. 1996 you have the Time of the End magazine, that's the internal. But we don't just face, if you're a conservative Adventist, you have a choice. You have the Time of the End magazine, our message. You also have conservative Adventism that, at least in Australia, in my growing up, was really particularly led in their thinking by Walter Wythe. Really nice man. Terrible message for this movement as far as the damage it does to people's worldview and how much they're willing to accept of what we say. 1996 externally I want to highlight. You have Fox News. Not everyone wants to pay for a subscription, but if you want to pay for any subscription, I want to recommend the Washington Post. By far, they're the best source I've been able to find. The New York Times is also good. All of these go online in 1996. The Washington Post, the New York Times, Yahoo is good as long as you go to the American version. I find whenever I go to a different country like Australia or the UK, it tends to get swamped in celebrity gossip and nonsense. But somehow the United States version keeps much more away from popular culture and more to do with serious events. That's just my experience. But the Washington Post, New York Times, Yahoo News, MSNBC. I also want to mention Cryptome. There was a young Australian man, Julian Assange. In this history, he was starting to train himself, a brilliant man as far as intellect goes, extremely gifted. I would suggest also extremely mentally unbalanced, which I think is part of the reason for his gift. But he trained himself in hacking. I don't know the technical terms. But he started training how to hack, and he wanted to create a website that where he could leak secret information. He tried to connect with Cryptome. Cryptome was set up in 1996. It was the very first. He saw Cryptome, and out of that he established WikiLeaks. This is where you see those websites begin as well. It really all ties back to 1996. But you see here true and false streams of information. So when you come down to 2014, you have these two false streams. And if you're a Nethinim, how do you know what to believe and what not to believe?
Check your Bible.
Not if you're a Nethinim. If you're a Nethinim and you want to check your Bible, you're probably going to go to a Protestant church and they're going to send you to this one. If you go to an Adventist church, they're going to send you to this one. Because we're drunk on the wine of apostate Protestantism. That's our problem. So if you're a Nethinim, what are you required to see? You're required to see this. You're required to see that there's true and there's false streams of information. It's as hard for them as it is for us. If you're an Adventist and you have to choose between Walter Weiss and conspiracy theories and this message, they have a choice. If you're an Nethinim, you have the same choice, whether or not you want this side and this side. They're set up in 1996. One is, if we were to go to Fox News, it's heavily based on conspiracy theories. That's why you see Donald Trump stand up in his rallies. And what does he rattle off? Conspiracy theory after conspiracy theory. What's the first one? The very first one he starts sharing in, I think it's 2011, is the birth of conspiracy theory, the idea that Obama is Kenyan. Again, fundamentally, the very base, what he's insinuating is racism. It's a racist conspiracy theory. But it is a conspiracy theory, and that is what gets him popular support and attention. And it begins his rise as a viable candidate by the religious right. But it's just conspiracy theories through and through. What he says about climate change, all of these issues, and we're going to highlight a few of them. But we have the same problem. Fox News, conspiracy theories, but there's also a true stream of information. We began to consider the work of the Nethinims. Their ploughed 2014 to 2019, then their early reign 2019 to Panium. Their latter reign Panium to Sunday law. Their harvest Sunday law to close of probation. Daniel 12:1. So Sunday law becomes their close of probation. If we were to take it back to the line of the priests, can you reject the increase of knowledge and the formalization and have any hope in this history? No. So for the Nethinims, can they stand on the wrong side of these issues and have any hope down here? So they're already being divided. And they're divided by two presidents. Obama, he's black. Clinton, she's a woman. What are the issues? Racism and sexism. It comes back. There's two movements in this history. What are they? Black Lives Matter and Me Too. It keeps coming back to the same two issues that run through externally and they run through internally. So if you're a Nethinim, when do you start being impacted by this movement? When do they start hearing of this message and being impacted? Anethanim? By us? After the Sunday law. We don't give them this message till after the Sunday law. When they come in person by person. The reason they're coming in person by person is because they cannot come in this history. Why can't they come in this history? Then they'd be Levites or they'd be priests. But there's another thing I want us to see that's not necessarily pleasant, but I think we need to consider. Why aren't we doing their ploughing? Why aren't we doing this for the Nethinims?
Because ourselves need to recognize.
If we were going to them in 2016 and giving them a message, what are we saying?
They're going to be held accountable.
They're going to leave them.
Yeah, they're going to be held accountable for that truth.
What
Saying
truth?
that we're ready to receive them, but we're not.
What are we saying to them in 2016? If we were doing that work, what would we have said to the Nethinims?
You need to be a Levite?
Could they have been a Levite or a priest?
Probably not.
Why?
Yeah, they could.
The church isn't pure.
Individually.
What would we have said in 2016? No, we wouldn't have. That's the problem, we wouldn't have. We would have said it could be Trump or Clinton. Why? Because we're on this side of the issue. We're over here. We have all the same problems that they have. We would have said it could have been Clinton. Because why? Because Jerry Falwell, who started this movement, put out a documentary called The Clinton Chronicles, completely based on conspiracy theories. And we're drinking from the wine of apostate Protestantism. And if we go to the Nethinims and we tell them, Fox News has a point, this side is accurate, that it could be Trump or Clinton, but it's quite likely Clinton because she's done all these terrible things, that we believe in conspiracy theories. I want to deal with those theories as we get later on, but if we were trying to reach the Nethinims in this history, we need to be fair about our judgment. Why? We say Adventism can't do public evangelism. Why?
They have the wrong message.
They have the wrong message, so why can't we?
We have.
Because we have the wrong message. Adventism can't do public evangelism because when they do, they kill people. They destroy them. If we had have been giving a message in this history, we would have destroyed them. We would have killed the Nethinims because we have conspiracy theories. That is why we have to get rid of them in this history. It's not just for us. So we can say it doesn't matter so much whether or not I have a little bit of a conspiracy theory about 9/11, or I have a bit of a conspiracy about this issue or that issue because I get the concept. And if it's just about us, that's fine. We might be able to scrape through. But if we want to give the message, it has to be pure, or we do a great deal of damage to people. So that is why when we come into this history, we have to sort it out, and we have to sort it out before we go to the Levites or the Nethinims. I want to take us back to that quote that we read. We went to a quote. It's the disciples at Pentecost. Eight Testimonies 267.2. When on the day of Pentecost the Holy Spirit was poured out upon the disciples, they understood the truths that Christ had spoken in parables. What's the foundation of the message? Parables. Is there any other methodology? No. Everything is founded on parable teaching. Whether you're a Pharisee or whether you're a disciple, you have to understand parables. The teachings that had been mysteries to them were made clear. The understanding that came to them with the outpouring of the Spirit made them ashamed of what? Their fanciful theories. Why do they have to see their fanciful theories at Pentecost? What are they about to do? They're about to go first to the church, first it's Jerusalem and then the Gentiles. You have both. First of all, they're at Jerusalem. They're going to go back to the Jewish nation. Then they're going to the Gentiles. So what has to happen before they go to two groups of people? Based on parable teaching, they have to get rid of their fanciful theories. Otherwise, what are they going to do to them? They're going to hurt them. They're going to do damage to that message. And we're going through that exact same experience. When the outpouring of the Holy Spirit comes, first of all, it's parable teaching. And second of all, it opens up to us our wrong understanding, our fanciful theories. That is why in this history, it's not us that's hidden, somehow protected from the world. We're not in a hiding time so they don't kill us. Persecution doesn't look like that yet. We're hiding from them because we would hurt them with this message. If we came to them in 2014 to 19 with a false stream of information. So when we consider, this is why I know I've had a few people tell me they agree with the concept, but they say I'm too strong when I say it. There's a reason that I'm fairly pointed, and that is because of the following. It's a little bit like the issue of time setting. And what's the issue in 1996 and 2012? Why do people reject these? Because of the quotes. So you have a quote and you have two groups of people, one read it one way and another read it another way. And I think that's what Brother Tyler began to say about the Constitution. You have something that people read in different ways. So in 1996, there's all these quotes about how there is no new organisation, and people can read that in different ways. One side just takes it straight as it says, no new organisation. Another group considers two things. First of all, its context, what she originally meant, and second of all, progression, what's changed since she said it. The same thing in 2012, all the quotes against time setting. One group just takes them as they are and says there is never again a message hung on time. Another considers what she meant when she said it, what issues she was facing, and also the issues of progression, whether or not we're in a different history and things change. And it becomes a similar issue down in this history as well. When I say that we should go back to 2012, it's an experience I want to have as well as everyone else. I don't mean to just pick on people and say they need to go back and repent. I'm saying to myself as well, and I've thought about this, I want to go back to 2012, put myself there, erase everything else I know about what I've learnt since then and think, would I have accepted the logic that was presented? Because if I wouldn't have, I'm still reading wrong. We're treating the symptom and not the cause of the rejection. And it's the same thing here. People can say, I get it. We can't believe in conspiracy theories, can't believe in Fox News, have to agree with the true stream of information. But there's an underlying issue. If it's 1996 and I start listening to Fox News, I'll say it in a different way. We're all good health reformers. If I start eating junk food and I eat junk food every evening for 23 years, what condition am I in? I'm sick. There's damage, physical damage. I'm not well. If you come to me and you say, that diet is going to kill you, and I say, okay, I accept it, I accept that diet is going to kill me, is that enough? I am not well still. Accepting this stream of information is wrong is only the very beginning of that journey. Why? Because it's come and formed our entire worldview. You eat junk food for 23 years, it forms the entirety, every cell of your body. And if you take in conspiracy theories and the wrong stream of information for 23 years, it forms your whole worldview. And accepting that that's wrong isn't enough. You can come to me and you can say this will kill you. Let's say it's something that's deep fried. I'll just say fries. A diet entirely of fries, it's going to kill you. You should be eating broccoli. and I say, okay, I accept that's bad for my health, I'm no longer going to eat it. But it's a process of time, and that's where it gets difficult, because that is an individual work. No one believes they have conspiracy theories. No one believes that their theories aren't founded in something. It becomes an individual work to see what we individually have that is a conspiracy theory. And I can assure you, if it comes from this stream of information, and if Trump is sharing that conspiracy theory at his campaign rallies, you're already in dangerous water. Just accepting that this is bad for you isn't enough when we've been ingesting it so long. We need to question our entire world view and rethink it. And then what people say is, now I just don't know what to believe. And I don't agree with that. If you go to someone and you say, this will kill you, they know what they should eat, they just don't like the diet. And that's our problem. We don't like the diet. And I know it's a work in progress, but it's not a work that's completed when we just accept that this is bad. Then there needs to be an internal work. This is to consider how we read. It's the same issue here. We need to go deeper than just recognizing that this is bad, because many of us have been ingesting this for a long period of time. I remember growing up, we'd go to every time Walter Weiss came to Australia, we'd go to Melbourne and listen to him speak. I loved Vladimir Putin. What he says makes so much sense about the West and the issues. But once we see it on a reform line that these are conspiracy theories, we need to shed them as fast as we can.
That's where conviction comes in. The Spirit
Yes.
of God, He doesn't leave us in ignorance.
No, but we can fight it. And the disciples, for most of their time, they fought it. Christ told them exactly what was going to happen, exactly what the end looked like, as far as what his end looked like, what their work was going to be about. And Ellen White says they kept dismissing the Holy Spirit. When they got to the cross, they failed the test. They'd been told, but they kept dismissing it because it conflicted with their worldview. So this is the issue. We have a period of training to go through, and our training from the very time of the end, from 1989, we're not just learning, we're unlearning. And the more we get into deeper our roots are into conservative Adventist thinking, the harder it is, because conservative Adventist thinking is on this side of the issue. And I want to demonstrate that a bit more later, what that looks like and where it's come from. So there's a couple of things I just wanted to remind us of. This 10-year history, because we're going to speak about 2004 and how that relates to their line. That everything ties back to the time of the end. 1989 to 91, you have a 2-year history here. And just like this 10-year history starts tying together all these different concepts, so does 1989 to 91. It also starts connecting so much in this history. World Wide Web, for example, fall of the Soviet Union, all of those things. I wanted us to consider why we are not yet doing a work of public evangelism and what needs to change before we do. So, we'll go on to our study of Acts 27. The other subject was Panium. We have these main events: 1989, 9/11, 14, 19, Panium, Sunday Law, close of probation, Second Advent. Those are our key waymarks. But between them we have like 2 smaller ones that are really the Concord and the Exeter. The Midnight Cry is also always one of these 2 smaller ones. It's always in between our 2 major bookends, you could say. So just based on this logic, you know that Panium is not a midnight cry on any one of our reform lines. It can't be. So we want to consider what makes Panium a midnight cry. I don't want to spend too much time on Acts 27 because we have a few other subjects that I would like to move on to. So we might go fairly fast through this first line. We went to Acts 27, we understood that it has to be studied as a parable. So we began from the beginning of the chapter, which is the beginning of Paul's journey. It's the ship of Adramyttium, and Adramyttium means to abide in death. So if you abide in death, what are you doing? What condition are you already in? You're already dead. Something comes that could bring you to life, and what do you choose? You choose to stay in a dead condition. So what does that tell us about the two men marked here? Felix and Agrippa. They're given to us at the very beginning of our reform line at Caesarea. Felix, a state power, represents the United States. Agrippa, a church power, represents Adventism. So we see that both are given a message. They're both in a dead condition. They're given the first angel's message, which has the opportunity to wake them up, and they choose to reject it and abide in death. So our reform line from here on in is really just a story of the United States and Adventism from 1989. We begin it at Caesarea. Caesarea means to be severed. And we took that back to the story of the Stone Kingdom and the beginning of its cutting out. We didn't really discuss Agrippa, so I just want to spend a moment on that. We would find his story if we went to Acts 25:22. These men both have a problem. What's their problem? Yes?
They heard, but they didn't take the message.
Yes.
They wouldn't take that conviction stuff.
No, they wouldn't humble themselves. What's also interesting in this history is that both are in relationships they shouldn't be in. So Felix married took a wife who had been already married to another man, and he convinced her through a false prophet to come into union. So he's there with Drusilla. That's I can't remember the words, something relationship. It's a wrong relationship between church and state. But you also have Agrippa here. Agrippa here is with Bernice, and who is Bernice? His sister. And that was a scandal. Even the Romans were horrified. They said not even a Roman with all our immorality would do that. But you see, Agrippa here was actually in a relationship with his sister. So both of them have a problem. So we talked about Felix represents the United States. You see Felix change to Festus, the same way we see Reagan change to Bush. And then we have Agrippa in Acts 25, and we'll read verse 22. Acts 25:22. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, thou shalt hear him. And then if we skipped over to chapter 26, 1-3. Then Agrippa said unto Paul, thou art permitted to speak for thyself. Then Paul stretched forth the hand and answered for himself. I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because I shall answer for myself this day before thee, touching all the things whereof I am accused of the Jews, especially because I know thee to be expert in all customs and questions which are among the Jews. So what is Paul able to say to Agrippa that he can't say to Felix? Thou knewest. He's able to say to Agrippa, you're an expert, you already know all about Jesus. You already know about not only what's been happening in his time, but also the books of Moses, all the customs and questions. He can't say that to Felix. If we were to go down to verse 22, 26:22. Having therefore obtained help of God, I continue unto this day, witnessing both to small and great, saying none other things than those which the prophets and Moses did say should come, that Christ should suffer, and that he should be the first that should rise from the dead, and should show light unto the people and to the Gentiles. And as he thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself, much learning doth make thee mad. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. For the king knoweth of these things, before whom also I speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him, for this thing was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. What else can he say to Agrippa that he can't say to Felix? Everything that's happened for the last years with the birth and work of Jesus, the cross, all of those events, Pentecost, he can speak them freely to Agrippa because Agrippa already knows about them. He's already familiar with the Jewish system. He's a Jew himself. Agrippa was part of the triumvirate. He was one of 3 men that ran the temple, chose the high priest. He's a leader of the church. And he's able to say to Agrippa, not only do you know all of our current history and all the prophecies that point to it, you believe those prophecies. But Agrippa said to Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. And Ellen White says that even though he saw the logic, what got in his way was pride. He knew it, he believed it, but he couldn't humble himself. Agrippa, if we went to Life of Paul, LP 255.2. She says, did the mind of Agrippa at these words revert to the past history of his family and their fruitless efforts against him whom Paul was preaching? Did he think of his great-grandfather Herod and the massacre of innocent children of Bethlehem, of his great-uncle Antipas and the murder of John the Baptist, of his own father Agrippa I and the martyrdom of the Apostle James? Did he see in the disasters which speedily befell these kings an evidence of the displeasure of God in consequence of their crimes against his servants? Did the pomp and display of that day remind Agrippa of the time when his own father, a monarch more powerful than he, stood in that same city attired in glittering robes while the people shouted that he was a god? Had he forgotten how, even before the admiring shouts had died away, vengeance swift and terrible had befallen the vainglorious king? Something of all this flitted across Agrippa's memory, but his vanity was flattered by the brilliant scene before him, and pride and self-importance banished all nobler thoughts. So she questions what went through Agrippa's mind when he's given this message. And how many generations does she speak of? 4. First of all, his great-grandfather Herod, then his great-uncle Antipas, then his own father Agrippa I. His great-grandfather Herod killed the children of Bethlehem. His great-uncle Antipas, John the Baptist. Agrippa I, his father, the Apostle James. So Agrippa is what generation? He represents the 4th generation. So we have the rejection of the first angel's message. And then if you go back to Acts 27, we'll read verse 1 to 5 and just lay out the course of this ship. Verses 1 to 5. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. And entering into a ship of Adramyttium we launched, meaning to sail by the coasts of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, And Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there they changed from the ship of Adramyttium to the ship of Alexandria. So the ship of Adramyttium is only verses 1 to 5 of the chapter. Everything else is the second ship. So Adramyttium takes you from Caesarea to Sidon, to Cyprus, to Myra, a city of Lycia. Sidon, there's a refreshing. What's a refreshing? Rain. And when does the rain begin on our reform line? 9/11. We won't go through them for time, but I'll give you the quotes. I want us to see Sidon as it's represented. If you were to go to Genesis 10:15, we will quickly turn there. Genesis 10:15. This is the introduction of Sidon. Sidon is named after the man Sidon. And I just want us to note, in case we get confused when we search for it, it's spelt two different ways in the Bible. We'll demonstrate that in a moment. So if you're searching for him, you would, to find every reference, you need two different spellings. So Genesis 10:15, who is Sidon's father? Canaan. Who is Canaan's father? Verse 6. Ham. Who is Ham's father? So what generation is Sidon? While we're here, we'll do the next one. The word Cyprus comes from the original word Kittim. Go to Genesis 10:4. And the sons of Javan, Elisha and Tarshish, Kittim and Dodanim. This is where you see Tarshish even come in. The men the genealogies that founded these cities. So Cyprus, if you were to trace back the word, comes from Kittim. Kittim is the son of Javan. Who is Javan the son of? Verse 2. Who is Javan the son of? Japheth. And who is Japheth the son of? Noah. What generation is Kittim? Fourth. We have the fourth generation repetitively marked. So I'll just give you, for your own research into Sidon, if you would turn to 1 Chronicles 1:13. I'll put it up here. This is just a repeat of Genesis 10:15. Both say the exact same thing, same wording. And Canaan begat Zidon his firstborn and Heth. What's the difference? One's with an S and one is with a Z. It's the same person, the same city. So if for your research, if you want to look into Sidon, you need to look for both spellings. Can everyone see that? Because some of the more interesting references to this city are with a Z. It's 1 Chronicles 1:13 for Zidon, Genesis 10:15 for Sidon. It's the same thing where we find that the spelling of the two different mountains. One with an S, one with a Z, but it's the same person. And it's the fourth generation. So I don't want to go through all the quotes, but I'll just reference them for you. Jeremiah 25:22. It says, and the kings of Tyre, the kings of Zidon, and the kings of the isles which are beyond the sea. How many groups? 3. Joel 3 verse 4. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon and all the coasts of Palestine? How many groups? 3. There's always 2, Tyre and Zidon, and then who's the third? It's a conglomerate. You have the kings of the isles or the coasts of Palestine. If you were to, I'll just give you, it's 2 chapters, Ezekiel 28 and 29. If you were to read those chapters, Ezekiel 28 is a judgment on Tyre. Ezekiel 29 is a judgment on Egypt. And in Ezekiel 28, it describes this power of Tyre. How does it describe Tyre? It says you're in the Garden of Eden. Was the city of Tyre in the Garden of Eden? So is this literal or spiritual? It has another meaning. In chapter 29, it talks about Egypt. It says it's the great dragon. Is it literal or spiritual? It has a literal application, but it also has a spiritual one. And wedged between the judgment of Tyre and the judgment of Egypt, in those last verses of chapter 28, it's the judgment on the city of Sidon. So there you have 3. You have Tyre, Sidon, and Egypt. 3 powers connected, all being judged. If Tyre has a spiritual application, if Egypt has a spiritual application, then Sidon must have a spiritual application. I'm suggesting this is the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. Who's Tyre? The papacy. And who's Egypt? The dragon. Who's Sidon? The false prophet. The United States. So we can see the United States marked here, and we can also see judgment. And we want to discuss 9/11 and what that judgment was, really from this whole history, why the United States is being judged. So we will come back to that. But those are just some references for us to look into Sidon. I think we have much more to learn about Sidon based on those references that hasn't yet been investigated fully. So Paul is refreshed. He goes through refreshing. He comes to Cyprus. And Cyprus means fair. What does it mean to be fair? There's a quote. Song of Solomon is not my favourite book of the Bible. It's not one I understand in its language. But there is one of my favourite quotes in the book of Solomon. I think it's chapter 4, verse 7. Song of Solomon 4:7. And if we are to follow the way to read a verse, which in its poetic sense is, what do you do when you see 2 parts of a verse? Like in Psalms. What's it doing? What would we call that? That they're all kind of different ways of phrasing the same concept, which you have. I want to say a repeat and enlarge. So first of all, it's going to say something, and then it's going to repeat it in different words to explain what it initially said. So what does it mean to be fair? It says you are all fair, my love, and then it defines what it means to be fair.
No spot.
There's no spot. Where? In you, on you? In. There's no spot in you. That's why I like this verse. It's not external. To be fair means there's no spot in you. If we were to go to Early Writings 238.1, she talks of an experience that the Millerites went through. It's near the close of the second angel's message. She says, I saw a great light from heaven shining upon the people of God. The rays of this light seemed bright as the sun, And I heard the voices of angels crying, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. This was the midnight cry which was to give power to the second angel's message. Angels were sent from heaven to arouse the discouraged saints and prepare them for the great work before them. The most talented men were not the first to receive this message. Angels were sent to the humble devoted ones and constrained them to raise the cry, Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Those entrusted with the cry made haste, and in the power of the Holy Spirit sounded the message. I will skip down to the next paragraph, paragraph 3. So it's really this whole section, 1 to 3. In every part of the land light was given upon the second angel's message, and the cry melted the hearts of thousands. It went from city to city and from village to village until the waiting people of God were fully aroused. In many churches the message was not permitted to be given, and a large company who had the living testimony left these fallen churches. A mighty work was accomplished by the midnight cry. So she describes the people in this time period. What do they have?
The living testimony.
The living testimony. And what does it mean to have the living testimony? How would we define that? Without spot. Inside. This is the characteristic of the living testimony, to be fair. And this is what she connects with the midnight cry. It's what is a characteristic that she places it that way, Mark. There's also two other there's also one other characteristic as well. We're talking about Cyprus. What was the problem with Cyprus in the book of Acts? It gave them so much trouble because two men came from Cyprus that both impacted the work. One was Elymas and one was Simon Magus. Elymas, is he external or internal to the early church movement? External. Simon Magus, is he external or internal? A baptized member of the early church movement. And what does Ellen White say is a characteristic, in the book of Acts, what is a characteristic of Simon Magus? What's his problem? It's called in the verses, we'll look it up. They actually define the root of his problem. Acts 8:23. Acts 8:23. Sorry? Bitter. It gives it a particular phrase. It's the gall of bitterness. They say that he's in the gall of bitterness. What does it mean to be in the gall of bitterness? First of all, gall is green, which I think gives us a clue. But Ellen White most gives us a description of what this looks like. Exactly. It's a letter, a letter she's written about Dr. Kellogg. SPTB, it's a strange reference. SPTB 07 61.4.
Special Testimony Series B.
Special Testimony Series B. Is that a volume 7? SPTB 07 61.4. It's a hard one to look up, but I can give you some keywords if that's hard. She says that she's not been able to sleep during the past night. Letters have come to me with statements made by men who claimed to have asked Dr. Kellogg if he believes the testimonies that Sister White bears. He declares that he does, but he does not. He sent a sensible letter to me while I was at Melrose, Massachusetts, saying, I have surrendered. But he has not spoken or acted as a man who has surrendered. He has felt bitterness of soul against the Lord's appointed agencies who have occupied the position of President of the General Conference. He has hated them. Has he surrendered that gall of bitterness? What is a gall of bitterness? It's jealousy. It's hatred of leadership. The Lord will not accept anything that he affirms which is false. The whole of the matter is not revealed. I have been waiting to see the least evidence of surrender. The word of the Lord to me is, he is only gathering his forces for another display to magnify himself. The ministers of God are being drawn in and deceived by his science. He is doing all in his power to create a division between the medical work and the ministry of the word. He has his messenger going forth to test the pulse of God's people and please him by disparaging the strength of the ministerial force. This large work and its sure results are plainly presented to me. I am so sorry that sensible men do not discern the trail of the serpent. The Lord would now have a straightforward, decided testimony born regarding every point of present truth. We are a denominated people, and we are not to yield up our faith to the science of human sophistry. So she's writing this about Dr. Kellogg, and she says he claims to believe her writings and the message, but does he? No. And his core problem is bitterness of soul, gall of bitterness, it's pride. So if we were to come to our reform line, I want us to see that we have 1989, increase of knowledge. We'll just mark 1996. And then we have 9/11. And then we have an increase of knowledge. We come to 2012. It's formalization. 2014. And then we have an increase of knowledge. We come to 2018, formalization. And then we have 2019. When we talk about the midnight cry, I want us to see that this is the midnight cry waymark. But this is the formalization of a message, and it carries with it certain characteristics. At 1996, what's a problem for the church? For the leadership of the Adventist church? Resentment. Why? Where's the message coming from? Not them. They've been bypassed. They have to surrender their pride and submit to a new leadership in 1996. 2012, what starts to happen inside the movement? The same thing. Now it's internal. Now you have Path of the Just. They're being drawn into recognizing the leadership of Elder Jeff. And what's their problem? They've got bitterness of soul against Elder Jeff. We come to this waymark, and what's happening within our leadership? It's the same thing. It has to be, because it's on a reform line. But the danger now is we have a new leadership. We understand that we have Moses to Joshua, Elijah to Elisha. There's always a switch, and it particularly happens in this history. And now, who do they have bitterness against? Elder Parminder. But it's a characteristic of this waymark, and you see it with Simon Magus. We call Dr. Kellogg, what do we call that? It's the Alpha apostasy. We're in the history of the Omega, but it's not done yet. It's a characteristic of this waymark, and it goes all the way through. He was the Alpha, now we're in the Omega. But they have the same core problem. And I also want to note, what other problem did Kellogg have? Did he ever sleep with his wife? No. He practiced marital celibacy. Why? He had a problem with women. You want to go into these apostasies, if you were to go in to see Path of the Just, if you were to look at Mark Bruce, William Pitt, if you were to start naming, I don't like to name them, if you were to start naming some of these people that have left the movement, Because of their hatred of leadership, they also have a problem with women, and so did Kellogg. Alpha and Omega repeat. So we leave Cyprus. We will stop now for time. What we next want to discuss is this history here. This is the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia. What does Cilicia mean? It means to overturn. And Pamphylia?
Nation of every tribe.
A nation made up of every tribe. So what is happening to what is our theme? What is this ship? It's the United States and Adventism. So if this ship is the United States and Adventism, what's happening to it between Cyprus and Myra? What happens between Panium and the Sunday law? And I know this is going to perhaps trip for the start if you haven't already followed these studies. I am marking Midnight Cry Sunday law. I just told you we can't do that. We're going to explain why we can. Particularly if I prefer to call that Panium. What happens to the United States and Adventism between Panium and Sunday law? They collapse. Both come to their end. The United States is overturned, the end of the 6th kingdom, and the beginning of the 7th. Same for Adventism. Between Panium and Sunday law, the Levites are coming in. By Sunday law, the last Levite has joined. There's nothing left of their church structure. They've been completely overthrown. So when we come back, we want to discuss what this looks like. What Panium to Sunday law looks like. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer and have a break. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Thank you that you show us where we are in history and that we can have faith in your leading and your guiding of this movement. I pray, Lord, that we will be prepared to do a work. We all have loved ones in the church and the world, and Lord, we want to help them find truth and be part of your kingdom. I pray that we'll be ready to do that when the time is right. And thank you that you have been so patient in leading and guiding your flock. I pray that you'll bring us together again and you'll bless not just the meetings, Lord, but our interaction between them as we fellowship and speak together. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.